So why don't we get started here? We're going to be recording this. People tell me I look like David Letterman, so that's probably fitting. Maybe like a cross between David Letterman and Conan O'Brien. So anyway, my name is Pat Kenneally. I'm the McHenry County State's Attorney. Thank you all very much for being here. We got a packed house in a nice intimate setting. So if anybody has any questions at any time, feel free to pipe up. Maybe I'll ask some questions of you guys. I remember in law school they called it the Socratic method, where you sort of try to learn through asking questions, and maybe we could try a little bit of that. But I do want to just sort of walk you through a lot of the stuff that we deal with. And I think that many people, I think probably the two things that surprised me when I first began prosecuting cases. And why don't we start there? Does everybody know what the State's Attorney's Office does? What do you think? Okay. So we're responsible for two things. First of all, we're responsible for prosecuting everybody that's charged with a misdemeanor or felony offense in McHenry County. All right. Secondly, we represent the county as a body politic, and we also represent all of the officials of the county, whether elected or whether just sort of rank and file employees in the county. They get sued, we have to deal with contracts, there's insurance issues, all the things that a lawyer would do for you, maybe other than divorce, we do for the county, all right? So those are our two responsibilities. But when I first started prosecuting, I started in traffic court and I worked my way up to special prosecutions, and we prosecuted all kinds of cases. But the two things that I found is far more frequent than I would ever expect were one, sexual abuse of children, okay, and two is elder abuse. And the reason I think that and not only are they common in terms of things that are being brought to the State's Attorney's Office to be investigated and prosecuted or otherwise, I think they're more common than we know. And the reason I think is because both of those things generally tend to happen not in the public square. Both of those things generally tend to happen behind closed doors, and to victims who are often powerless, unable, don't have sufficient faculties or aren't present enough to defend themselves. And bad people generally will tend to prey upon weaker people in society. It's just that simple. There's a number of types of elder abuse. There's domestic abuse, which we see all the time, especially involving caretakers, family members, husbands, sons. There's sexual abuse, which we can talk about. There's emotional abuse, which isn't necessarily a crime, but certainly can have some enormous ramifications and set people up for crimes, whether it's financial exploitation, things of that nature. You make somebody feel worthless, and all of a sudden they stop being able to defend themselves. Confinement and restraint, which is a permutation of domestic abuse, financial exploitation, threats and intimidation, neglect, passive neglect, theft. All of these things are related. So domestic abuse. I've handled probably about 20 murder cases, and 3 of those murder cases involved elderly victims. And it's interesting because all 3 of them involved their son. So it's very common in domestic violence situations especially when you have a mother who loves her children or who loves her son, and she's a widow. And there's kind of this son that sort of fails to launch, you know what I mean? He never makes it out of the house. He never gets a job. He's never able to sustain himself on his own, and he's in the house. And a lot of times he's angry. 3 of the cases that I've had involve the son killing his mother, his elderly mother, over the age of 7. And they were horrific cases. One was with a hammer, one was with a knife, one was strangulation. And this is something that we need to be conscious of, because it's not just children who live with elderly people, it's also caretakers. It's anybody who's responsible for taking care of somebody who's either in a nursing home or otherwise. And a lot of times it involves confinement, restraint, isolation. Very oftentimes people are subject to emotional abuse. What you want to do is you want to diminish that person's feeling about themselves to where they want to stick up for themselves, to where they don't think that they deserve it. So emotional abuse is a necessary corollary with domestic abuse. You want a victim that can't defend themselves. You want a victim that's not going to speak out. And it's incumbent upon you guys, and it's incumbent upon us, it's incumbent upon the public who is around people who may be exposed to domestic violence to speak up on their behalf. There's so many cases that we see, especially with regard to domestic violence, just in general, that doesn't involve elder abuse, but it also involves, but it also includes elder abuse, where there's a number of people that are saying to themselves, you know, look, where you have a victim that's unwilling to point the finger at their abuser, that to a certain extent is an accomplice in their own abuse, you know? And that's for a lot of variety of reasons. Maybe it's their son, maybe it's somebody that they love, maybe it's their husband. They don't want to see that person get in trouble. They don't want to jeopardize their pension. They don't want to they don't want that person to be arrested, you know? And there's a whole host of reasons why people cover up for the abuse of the person who's doing it, but it can't be tolerated, and it's far too dangerous. And when you're dealing with an elderly victim, especially somebody who may be compromised from a health standpoint or is subject to real serious injury, you guys need to speak up, and you guys need to be their champion in order to ensure that this type of stuff doesn't keep going. All right? So the solution to any time you see domestic abuse is always to call the police. All right? Sexual abuse. So there's a case that I had about 3 years ago, and there's a woman with horrible dementia. And every single morning she would tell the nursing staff, Mr. Spidey Hands came in and he raped me. Mr. Spidey Hands came in and he raped me. And they weren't sure if this was some sort of delusion resulting from the dementia. They weren't really sure sort of where this was coming from. And so they just, at first they just sort of shrugged it off. But she kept saying it and she kept saying it, and her son, who began to sort of think that there may be something that was going on. So her son sort of went to the staff and was like, look, you know, she keeps bringing up this Mr. Spidey Hands who's raping her. What's going on with the night staff? Is there somebody that comes in and gives her medication, or is there somebody that comes in and sort of changes her dressings or whatever the case may be? And they say, yeah, there's one guy that comes in, he's on the night staff and there's not a ton of supervision at night. They say, well, can we do something? Is there any way to check on him? Can we interview this guy and ask what's going on? So they do. So they bring the guy in and they say, you know, is there anything going on? Are you touching this person inappropriately? Of course, he's shocked, appalled, galled at the fact that anybody would accuse him of anything of such a sordid nature. So they say, so they go back to the son and they say, you know, look, that we talked to the guy, we checked out his background. We don't hire people unless we do a full background check on him. He's clean. We don't have any reason to suspect that he's doing anything. Your mother has dementia. My guess is that she's just having bad dreams. So what the son does is he gets a Nest camera. Have you guys heard of that? So he gets a little Nest camera, which is a camera which has it's got sort of like a Bluetooth component to it, and it's got a motion sensor. And anytime somebody comes into the room, it turns on, and then it records onto a website. And what they saw was that this guy was coming into her room, okay? He was doing two things, both of which were horrific and hard to watch, I guess, on video. First thing he was doing is he was taking off her fentanyl patch, all right? And then he was licking her skin there in order to ingest fentanyl, okay? Because he was an opiate addict, all right? The second thing he was doing was he was digitally penetrating her, all right? Now, it was vile, and and I guess the point that I'm making is that, again, it is up to all of us, because a lot of times the nursing home staff is going to fail you, and very often times police are going to fail you, and very often times when you're talking about elderly victims, they automatically have a credibility problem, especially if there's a diminished mental capacity there. They automatically have a credibility problem, and every single time something is brought to the attention which is ugly and requires an aggressive response, a lot of times, well, let's hold off a second. We're making some pretty serious accusations here about somebody based on the word of, you know? And so I think it's incumbent upon all of us to make sure that we follow through on those things. But police don't uncover crimes. The public uncovers crimes, okay? And then the police go investigate it after the fact. So the police are kind of like historians. Something happens, and then it's up to the police to go back and to reconstruct a historical account of what happens. The witnesses are people like you. The witnesses are people like you that bring it to the attention of the police, and that's how these things get reported, and that's how these things get solved. All right? Common perpetrators of elder sexual abuse include friends, live-in nursing aides, happens all the time, live-in nursing aides, in and around property, financial information, credit cards, purse, all the rest of that stuff. It's commonplace for those things to get stolen. Nursing home assistants, family members, and other types of care providers that are left alone to care for the elderly individual most likely takes place in the victim's place of residence. Signs of sexual abuse, I'll let you guys go through those. Very oftentimes, there's going to be bruising, especially if somebody is on some type of blood thinners, have trouble walking or sitting, bleeding, irritation, or pain. Very oftentimes, you can uncover these things if somebody with a diminished mental capacity is engaging in unusual or inappropriate actions that appear to be from a sexual relationship between the perpetrator or between the perpetrator of the elder sexual abuse and the victim. So what that means is, if you have somebody who maybe has a diminished mental capacity, and there's somebody on the nursing staff or the live-in nursing, and they're engaging in and that person is acting towards their caretaker as though they are in a boyfriend-girlfriend type of relationship, that's a red flag. Financial exploitation. All right. So let me tell you a story about Walter White. Does anybody watch Breaking Bad?
Yeah.
All right. Well, this guy's name was Walter White. Okay. And he was 96 years old. And Walter worked his whole life for ComEd, and he had a good pension. And after he retired at about 65, he went down to Florida. Walter lived in Florida till he was 94. His wife was 92. She died. So now Walter's 94, down in Florida. All his family is back up in McHenry County. So Walter was still with it. He was still sharp. He was in a wheelchair. He chewed tobacco. He always had like one of those, I don't know what you call it, chew things in his mouth all the time. Every single time I talked to him, invariably chewing tobacco. But he was sharp and he was with it. But he was 96 years old. All right, so there was some decline. So Walter comes back up to McHenry, and he's going to live with his son and his son's wife. Right? So Walter comes back, and on the plane ride back to McHenry County, Walter's sitting on about $200,000. Okay, so Walter goes and lives in the guest room in his son and his daughter-in-law's house. And everything's going fine, and Walter's getting fed and he's being taken care of, and he notices that the floor of the house is being redone. He notices that they're getting construction on the front of the house. He notices that they buy a pontoon boat, and but he's happy for him. He thinks maybe they came into some money, had success financially, and so everything's going fine until Walter gets sick, and then he ends up in the hospital. And Walter was chewing tobacco, and one of the nurses sort of said, Walter, you need to get a toothbrush if you're going to be chewing all that tobacco. He says, well, put it on my account, give me a toothbrush. The nurse says, all right. And she comes back 5 minutes later, she says, Walter, you don't have any money in your account. So he goes, all right, we'll talk to why don't you go talk to my daughter-in-law and take it out of my account. And on for an investigation, it turns out Walter doesn't have any money in his bank account. And Walter is shocked. Can't explain it. How is it that $200,000 has been used up when basically the money keeps getting refreshed by virtue of the fact that he's getting Social Security and his pension, and the only expenses that he's had essentially are food. So where exactly did all of this money go? Well, it turns out that when Walter showed up from Florida, him and his ne'er-do-well daughter-in-law went to the bank and they did a joint checking account. Okay? So Walter, thinking that his daughter-in-law had his best interests at heart, said to himself, wouldn't it be nice if I didn't have to go to the bank every single time I wanted to buy something? And wouldn't it be nice if she could go and buy me clothes, and she can go and get my groceries, and it just for convenience sake, I want to make sure that somebody else has access to my money so that they can use that money to take care of me. Okay? Well, it turns out she didn't use the money to take care of her. She used that money for frivolous spending for her and her husband. But, so, now the question, so now Senior Services comes to the state's attorney's office, and they say, theft of $200,000, this is the worst case of financial exploitation I've ever seen. I want these people prosecuted and I want them thrown in jail. Okay, sounds good. Let's go and interview daughter-in-law and son, okay? Well, here's what they say. Daughter-in-law says, well, what are you talking about? We stole the money from Walter. Gave us the money. Walter was 96 years old, and all he wanted to do was to see us live our best lives for the few months or years that he had left. He wanted us to enjoy his money while he was still alive, and he wanted to see us enjoying that money. And the deal was we could have his money so long as we fed him and gave him a place to stay. Son echoed the same story. So now we're sort of looking at it, okay, well now we have sort of a he said, she said, and we have to overcome proof beyond a reasonable doubt. Does that strike you guys as proof beyond a reasonable doubt? Now we ultimately took the case to trial, and we go through it with Walter, and now Walter's about 97 years old, and he's continuing to slow down, and things aren't getting any better for Walter, all right? But he's able to get out the story, Walter, did you give them permission to use any of this money? No. Walter, what was the point of the joint bank account? Well, the point of the joint bank account was so that she could use the money to take care of me. That was a firm understanding that we had. Walter, at any time did you give them consent to essentially clean you out? No, I didn't. Okay. Defense attorney gets up and he says, Walter, what's your grandson's birthday? I don't know. Walter, what are your grandson's names? Walter, about 6 months ago, you had a conversation with my clients about the finances. What was the topic of that conversation? I don't remember having a conversation. So what they did was they began to attack Walter's ability to recall, and in fairness, there was some problems with Walter's memory. And so now it's not only he said, she said, but it's he said with some problems with the ability to recall versus she said. And we ultimately ended up settling that case out of court, but that gives you an understanding of why these cases may be so difficult to prosecute. Now imagine what would have happened if Walter had died. All right, so somebody gets cleaned out, somebody gets literally taken to the cleaners, all of their life savings, they report it to the police. Now usually it'll take about a year at least for a case like that to proceed to trial, and in between somebody dies. Now what do we do? It makes it very difficult to hold people accountable for what they've done. So living independently with the caretaker, there's no guardian of the state. These are the type of people who are most vulnerable to some type of financial exploitation. Perpetrators are most likely to be adult children or spouses. That is true. That should be highlighted. Okay? And they're more likely to be male, to have a history of past or current substance abuse. That's exactly right. All right? If there's somebody around, be very wary of somebody around an elderly person with money who has a substance abuse issue. They're trying to exploit them. I guarantee it. Trouble police, usual suspects, right? This is the definition of financial exploitation. This is what the daughter-in-law in Walter's case was charged with. That the person with the disability, he or she knowingly and by deception, that's what we allege, obtains control over the property of an elderly person. The by deception was the agreement that she made with Walter that she was only going to use these finances for Walter's best interests. All right. We also charged him with theft. The person exerts unauthorized control. It was unauthorized. It was Walter's money. He didn't authorize them to spend money for their own personal use. Therefore, it's unauthorized. We can also charge it by deception, which is what we talked about with financial exploitation, or by threats. A lot of times people are threatened. Give me your money, or I'm going to hurt you. Give me your money, or I'm going to put you in a nursing home. And nobody's ever going to hear from you or see you again. That's a threat. So the Adult Protective Services Act, it's codified, you don't need to know that. It creates a system for addressing elderly abuse. Essentially what this does is it sets up senior services, okay? If you are aware of any type of exploitation, injury to anybody who's over 55, senior services can help you. Okay, they have investigators. They can come out and they can investigate it, and they can refer the appropriate matters to the police. In addition to that, you can always just call 911. All right. So senior services and the police for any type of elder abuse are the two resources that you can draw upon to get the help that you'll need. Okay, guardianship. So what guardianship is it requires, it allows the court to appoint somebody to make certain decisions on behalf of elderly people, whether those be health decisions or whether those be financial decisions. All right? And there's an enormous benefit to having a guardian, especially with regard to financial, because what it requires is that the guardian must file an annual report or a quarterly report or even a monthly report with the court itemizing every single expense, how every single dollar is spent. So even people who may still be able to manage their financial affairs, okay? Even people who are still living on their own and still have a independence nature of their lives, still may want to consider getting a guardian, because it's not as though a guardian is somebody that isn't going to work with you with regard to financial decisions. There's a number of different ways that a guardian can interact with an elderly person to ensure that their finances are best looked after and still give that person ultimate control over their finances. But things can happen fast, and we've seen it. I've seen it with my own mother. My mom has dementia right now, and 3 months ago, if you were talking to her, you never would have known. You never would have known that my mom was sick, all right? And now, I was talking to her on the phone last night, and she doesn't even know the names of her grandchildren. All right? So things can happen fast, and if you have a structure in place, especially with a guardian, you can be protected, and you can ensure that when you do finally reach that tipping point, when you do come to the Rubicon, and the financial decisions that are being made may not be in that elderly person's best interest, the guardian can take over from there, and they're in place. And then you don't. And very oftentimes, when you're dealing with elderly people, they're adults, and when and a lot of times people have a misplaced pride. You know, I'm not giving up my financial decision, even though. And a lot of times there's a sick, like with my mom with the dementia, that the sickness is telling her that she's not sick. You know, part of her sickness is telling her that there's nothing wrong with her. And so getting a guardian involuntarily is a pretty significant process, because courts are very leery of just stepping in and taking people's property from them without due process of law. So there's a whole due process proceeding that would need to take place before a guardian could be appointed involuntarily. And by that time, a lot of times, the financial situation isn't what it was. All right, so this is the authority of the guardian. They can make certain decisions with regard to health and with regard to finances. Responsibility of a guardian. The responsibility of a guardian is based on the level of control the guardian had. There can be a custom-made guardian relationship. Okay, so there's not a one-fit-all type of guardian. The court can define and specify the specific limits and authority of a guardian in the document that they appoint, giving more or less control to the guardian, and they could even give more and more control as maybe things begin to deteriorate. All right. So this is what we talk. So this is some of the difficulties that we face when we're talking about prosecuting elder abuse. All right. Does anybody know what hearsay is? Who knows what hearsay is?
Somebody just said, I heard. God said.
Okay, yeah. But what's the legal definition of hearsay?
Third party.
No lawyers in the crowd. Yeah, so it's an out-of-court statement, essentially by somebody who's not testifying. Okay? So let's get back to the Walter case. Let's say Walter had died. Could we have prosecuted that case? No. Why? Because everything Walter said was hearsay and wasn't going to come in. Walter's not available to testify. All right? Competency. Time is always working against us, especially with elder abuse cases. All right? So let's say that Walter's case had gone on 3-4 years and Walter began to deteriorate. Let's say you're talking about my mom. All right? and something had happened to my mom 6 months ago, and she was able to tell police and give a detailed account of what she suffered. Now she's not able to do that, all right? And if so if you put my mom on the stand right now to talk about abuse that she may have suffered 6 months ago, we're not going to win that case, right? Delayed reporting, very oftentimes abuse goes on and on and on and on. It never gets reported, and by the time it does get reported, many people forget. Time is always working against the state's attorney's case. An age on a case does not help us because you have diminished memories. You have things that people don't remember. You have the specifics that begin to sort of fade into the background as time continues to go on and on. Identification. Who's responsible for this? Let's say that people believe the Spidey Hands case, but that person's just simply not able to identify who it was that committed the offense. Who stole their money? Who went into their purse and took their credit card? All right? So those are some of the things that are always working against us, and these are some of the factors as to why these types of cases are so difficult to prosecute. So let's talk about identity theft.
Yeah. In the case with elderly people, when their facilities are with them, can't you get a written document statement and have them sign it and notarize it? Can that stand up in court?
So there's a Sixth Amendment, go ahead.
Because you know that, especially if they have dementia, that it's going to get worse and worse. But while they have their wits about them, why can't you have it in a written document?
Well, the problem with that is another aspect of the Bill of Rights. So the Sixth Amendment to the Constitution says that everybody has the right to cross-examine any witnesses against them. Okay? So if, let's say we talked about Walter, let's say we got Walter to write out a detailed statement of everything that had happened to that, and we say, Judge, we want to submit this into court, and we want to give this to the jury to consider. Right? Then the defense attorney would jump up and say, Judge, I object. Mr. White, while he may have written that, at the time that he wrote that, I never had the opportunity to question him on the contents of that document. Therefore, this is a violation of my client's Sixth Amendment right to cross-examination.
Okay, but couldn't you have gotten the cross-examination and get it recorded and...
So that's one. So that is one aspect of the element. So one of the things that you can do in criminal cases is take what's called a videotape evidence deposition, and that is one of the things that we did in Walter's case. All right. So, but that's a process, and that requires that requires us filing a motion, and then it also requires us scheduling the evidence deposition. So we can do that, and we do that. A lot of times that can take, you gotta, so you see from the time that Walter reports that to the time that you're taking the evidence deposition, at least 6 months have passed. At least 6 months have passed. Because think about it, you gotta have the defendant arraigned, and then the defendant's gonna have 2 or 3 months to find an attorney, and then the defense attorney's gonna wanna say, I wanna review all discovery in this case so that I have the opportunity to fully, completely, and I have all the facts about me when I'm going to sit down and conduct the evidence deposition. That's going to take another 2 or 3 months for me as an attorney to review it, and the defense attorney is not going to be in a rush to try to get this evidence deposition in, and the judge is always going to say, well, we want to make sure that the defendant is afforded all of his rights, all of his due process rights, and we want to make sure that his attorney is adequately prepared and fully advised so that when he does sit down for the cross-examination, it comports with due process.
Does the power of attorney for property cover something like that, or is that
The power of attorney does that cover
Say
what?
if you had an elderly person and mother and father or whatever, both my folks are deceased, but and had them sign a power of attorney for property.
It would cover
but
that.
But they're still...
Yes, it would cover that. The difference between the power of an attorney and guardianship is generally the power of attorney is not reporting to the court.
Okay, but it would cover...
But it would allow you, yes, to make decisions with respect to their financials or any property.
And then if they went outside of those parameters, then
They could be prosecuted, but again, nobody's looking over that, nobody's looking over the power of attorney shoulders.
Patrick, again, the best, for anyone's best interest is to have a document written out, what you want with your finances, where it's signed by all parties involved, you know.
Yeah, I think so.
And that would have covered Walter.
That would have covered Walter, and I think also if Walter had begun the process of a guardianship and had said, look, you know, and like I said, I mean, it could be, the guardianship could say that Walter, for the time being, has, unless and until the court is aware of evidence where Walter is unable to adequately and responsibly dispense his funds, Walter is primary decision maker with regard to all monies that shall be dispersed through daughter-in-law or son, something like that.
So keep a paper trail. is what
Yeah,
you're saying.
yeah, and started early.
Yes.
I just have a question about Walter. Did his son and daughter-in-law still take care of him after all that?
Walter died soon thereafter, and no. Walter actually moved out of the house, went into, what's the nursing home on 120 Fox?
Oh, Fox Point.
Fox Point. Walter went to live at Fox Point, and as far as I know, never talked to his son or daughter-in-law again, you know?
Okay.
Yes, please.
I did not hear what she asked. What should Walter have done?
So what I think Walter should have done was to set up a guardianship with his daughter-in-law acting as the guardian, or with his son acting as the guardian, which would have required all the money that they spent on behalf of Walter to have been itemized and filed with the court.
Oh, so that's different than power of attorney.
It's different than power of attorney. So the difference between guardianship and power of attorney is that with power of attorney, nobody's looking over your shoulder. Yes, you can make decisions with regard to finances and health, but you don't have to file anything with the court whereby you're demonstrating that you're doing it responsibly. Okay? All right, let's move on to identity theft real quick. Someone steals your personal information, uses it without permission, can damage your finances, credit history. You guys all know what identity theft is, I'm sure, at this point. So I was at an expo in Huntley, and somebody who lived in Sun City came up to me, and they said, I was the victim of identity theft. And I said, okay, tell me about it. So they said, well, I got a call from somebody, and they said, Grandma.
Oh, yeah.
And I said, Billy, is that you? And they go, yes, it's me, Billy. And it sounded exactly like their grandson. Okay, it's what we hear all the time. Sounded exactly like their grandson. Billy, is that you? Grandma, don't tell Mom and Dad I'm in jail, okay, and I need somebody to bail me out. Well, how do I bail you out? Well, you can do it a couple different ways, but the easiest way is for you to go to Target, get a gift card for $1,000, and then I'm going to call you back in 2 hours. Beautiful grandma loves her grandson, goes to Target, gets a gift card, comes back, sure enough, phone rings. Grandma, could you read me the number off of that Target card? So she reads the number off of the Target card, thinking that she solved the problem, satisfied with herself, expecting to get a nice Christmas present that year, and then once you know it, they call back in about a month. Grandma, it's Billy again. How are you? Well, I'm doing fine, Billy. How are you? Grandma, I ran into some more trouble. I need you to go and get the Target. You gotta bail me out. These police are just after me, and they're trying to set me up for crimes just because they don't like me. Well, Billy, what's your birthday? Click. All right. So think about it this way. My job. Okay. So that's. So let's put ourselves in the shoes of the person who's doing the grift. Okay. That's 5 minutes of work, and they make $1,000. Right? If it works, if they make 50 calls in an hour, and they get one person to bite, it's pretty good living. All right, right? That's could be $5,000 a day, $8,000 a day, $10,000 a day. I spend all of my working energy and vitality being the state's attorney. Okay? Now let's say that Kenneally turns into Walter White and he breaks bad. All right? And I say, you know what? To hell with the state's attorney stuff and solving crimes. All right? I'm going dark. I'm going bad. and I want to spend 8 hours a day, every single day, trying to scam elderly people. Do you think I'm going to get pretty good at it? If that's my job?
Yeah.
Okay, so it's not, these aren't like kids calling you from, just as like a prank. These are professionals. All right, and they are all over. They're in Ukraine, and they're in Greece, and they're in Thailand, and they're in Boca Raton, and they're in South America. You know, they are all over. And so when people come to the state attorney's office, and so when that woman comes up to me and says, "You got to do something about that," what am I going to do? My playground is McHenry County. That's my sandbox. Anything that happens, we're not the NSA. I can't like track the phone to some burner phone that's gone through 50 different networks. All right, and so not only are they good at it, okay, but they're also good at covering their tracks. All right, so when they send their IP address through 50 different servers, there's no way to trace it, and there's no way for me to do anything. And let's say that I discover that it's a guy. Let's say I discover that it's Boris Smirnov in Russia that is the perpetrator. You think Interpol's going to go and get him and bring him back to McHenry County for a $1,000 grift? No. No way. All right. So, so the point is that the best protection against identity theft is right here. All right. Never, unless you call them, give out your information to anybody that calls you on the phone. Ever. Never, ever, ever, ever. Ever. If somebody calls you, it should never end with you giving them money, credit card information, anything related to financial, ever. If you call them and you verify that that's your bank, or you verify that that's Target because you want to buy something for your grand, that's different. But if somebody's calling you, don't ever give them any information, ever. All right?
Patrick, you also have to be careful of looking up for an account on the internet, and there's so many fraudulent accounts that look like let's say you're calling for Chase Bank. There are so many Chase Banks that they have. Which one is the official one? Because they'll have official on theirs too. So you have to be careful.
You have to be careful of that, and we're going to talk about that a little bit with regard to prescription drugs as well. All right. One of the reasons why they got those chips, you guys had the credit cards with the chips, is because they had gotten so good at that these scam artists were able, when you swipe the magnetic strip, there's like if you have a machine, you can actually pick that number out of the air. You pick that number out of the air. So the bottom line is that 1 in 10 people generally are going to be the victims of identity theft at some point. Most of it's small time kind of stuff. There's things, go ahead please.
Not small time. I was a victim of identity theft. They took my checkbook wallet. So they had all the checks, they had everything. It took about 3 years. They went through $10,000 immediately, sold it to someone to buy a car, sold it to Florida for someone to use for a house. It was a nightmare, an absolute nightmare, and all quick, real quick.
Yeah, like I said, most of it's small time stuff. A lot of times, sometimes it can result in just an enormous headache where you have to get a whole new social security number. There's a whole process. Most of it involves credit card stuff. Okay, so here's what you can do. In addition to not giving out your credit card information to people who you're not certain, absolutely certain, are legitimate. Keep your purse, be careful with your trash. Shred documents. Does everybody have a shredder here?
Yeah.
Okay, everybody should have a shredder. Shred all your financial documents. Keep your wallet and your purse close. You don't want to get your checkbook stolen. And then be wary of people calling you, as well as some of these online scams. Here's what you do if you're ever the victim of identity theft. All right, first thing you need to do is place an initial fraud alert on your credit card report or freeze your credit card. You can do that, okay, by contacting anyone. You want to contact your bank, and you can contact any one of these credit reporting agencies: Equifax, Experian, TransUnion, okay? And after you freeze all of your credit, okay, you want to call one of them, and if you call one of them, and once a year you can get a free report from all these people. Get your credit report and take a look at what's there, what's legitimate, what's not legitimate. All right. Third, file a complaint with the Federal Trade Commission. It's easy. All you can either call this number to file a complaint, or you can go to this website to file a complaint where you just sort of describe what happened, what is the nature of this scam, and how much are you out, all right? And this will become your FTC affidavit, and then you file a police report, all right? And then you take this document and the police report to your credit card company, and you say, I'm not paying those fees, and 99 times out of 100, you're not gonna end up paying those fees, all right? So, so those are the steps that you should take if you're ever the victim of identity theft. Here are some things that you can do to protect yourself, which we've talked about. And other scams. So there's a new Medicare card that's going out now, all right, to everybody. There's calls going out that's saying that your Medicare card got canceled. It's not in the mail. You need to call us right now and give us your personal information. All right. So that's right now. Counterfeit prescription drugs, websites. People want to save money on prescription drugs. They go to websites and they try to order them. Very oftentimes, those websites are not legitimate. Happens all the time. We've seen about 3 or 4 cases of that. Grandma, grandpa ploy, we talked about that. Lottery scam, you've won $1 million. Nobody here is going to win $1 million, okay? You haven't won $1 million, you're not going to win $1 million. I hate to break it to you, okay? I never say, see, I know there's still skeptical people. When I tell them that, there's still people that are skeptical of the fact that they're not going to win $1 million. So I don't know what else to say. Chances are you're not going to win $1 million. If somebody calls you and tells you you won $1 million, good shot that that person's not telling you the truth. And a lot of times it's unlock the winnings by, you got to pay a small fee to unlock the winnings. And then there's a lot of reverse mortgage scams out there too. Be careful of that. And I would be remiss, first of all, does anybody have any questions on this? Okay, I'd be remiss if I didn't talk about opioids real quick, okay? Last year in 2017, we had 80 members of our community overdose on an opiate-related drug. Does everybody know what opiates are? Okay, so the baseline opiate is morphine. That's sort of how you judge everything with respect to opiates. So morphine's an opiate. Hydrocodone is an opiate. Oxycontin is an opiate. Tylenol 3 is an opiate. Percocet is an opiate. Vicodin is an opiate. Fentanyl is an opiate. All right. You know what else is an opiate? Heroin. You know what the difference between heroin and Oxycontin is? Not a lot. Not a lot at all. Do you know what? Because 100 years ago, heroin was the Oxycontin. It was developed for medical purposes. Right? So 78 people in our community overdosed on an opiate-related drug. Right? About 25% of those people were people that were 55 years and older. You think they were shooting up heroin?
No.
No way. They overdosed on their medication. All right? And there is a epidemic of opiates being overprescribed in this country. America has a population that's America's population is 5% of that of the world. All right? You know what percentage of the opiates we consume? About 85%. All right? So this stuff is going out the door like candy. And I'm not your doctor, all right? And I'm not gonna get in between or tell you how to take your medication. Just be conscious of it. Be aware of it, because people take an Oxycontin and it has an effect. It's very good at dulling pain, but it also affects your mental capacity. You get disoriented, you forget to take it. You have a fentanyl patch. Fentanyl is incredibly powerful stuff. Incredibly powerful stuff. And if those are things that are being used, you just have to be conscious of that. And if you don't have to take an opiate, my respectful recommendation is that you talk to your doctor. Okay? So, what questions can I answer you guys about this or anything else related to the state's attorney's office?
Patrick, I would just like to speak in and say, we've handed out questionnaires for you people to fill out before you leave. Would you please fill those out? Thank you.
Yes, please.
Reverse mortgage scams, all kinds of things out there. Anything you can tell us that would be a red flag?
Anything related to somebody contacting you about a reverse mortgage, you know? And it can come in many different faces, you know, reverse mortgage. You qualify for a reverse mortgage. All we need is your information, and we can get you the lowest interest rate and the best deal, and, you know, so anything related to reverse mortgages. All right, well, thank you all for your attention, and if there's any questions that you guys have with respect to any of this, do not hesitate to contact the state's attorney's office. We'd be more than happy to talk with you and help you if we can.
Thank you, sir.
Every day. Crazy. Yeah. Even I get scared. They're like, you're gonna be sued, and I'm like, who's this? Yeah, this is the IRS, or this is, I got one.
I'd be happy to do that. I won't scam you.
I knew it. You know, I'll get back in my car, and then I realized.